Call the meeting to order. This is the annual meeting of the Hudson School District for 2015. I'm Jamie Johnson, the board president, and I'd like to introduce our other officers and members of the school board at this time. Bruce Hanson, vice president. Bruce, you want to raise your hand so folks know? All right. Carrie Whitaker, clerk. Lynn Robson, treasurer. Rob Brown, member. Sandy Gerke, member. And Sue Katas, member. The superintendent, who's been on the job now, this is his 70th day, Dr. Nick Olette. And our financial services director has joined us, Tim Erickson. We'll be going over the budget later. And our parliamentarian is the district legal counsel, Mick Waltzberger, from the law firm of Rupp, Anderson, Squires, and Waltzberger, PA. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Waltzberger because he's our parliamentarian as well as laying out the parameters for this meeting.
Good evening. It's my privilege to serve as your parliamentarian here this evening, and I'd like to begin by briefly reviewing the parliamentary procedures or ground rules that will apply at this annual meeting of the electors of the School District of Hudson. The procedures are intended to promote an orderly and free-flowing meeting. For purposes of this meeting, you need to understand the definition of an elector. And an elector is a citizen of the United States who's 18 years of age or older and has resided in the School District of Hudson for 10 or more days before this annual meeting. Each elector has the right to make comments and ask questions at the appropriate point on the agenda. Specifically, when we reach item 8 on the agenda, which is the hearing on the budget, the electors have an opportunity to make comments and ask questions regarding the budget. All comments must relate to an agenda item, however. Electors are encouraged to submit other comments in writing to the superintendent or to present them at the next public comment session at a regularly scheduled board meeting. If you're an elector and you desire to make comments or ask questions, there's a procedure that you must follow. First, we ask that you come to the microphone, state your first and last name, state your address, and then wait to be recognized by the chair. After you've been recognized by the chair, you may then proceed with your comments. Only one elector may speak at a time. There are some rules for large numbers of individuals who might speak, but I don't think we're going to have that issue here this evening. As an elector, you also have the right to make motions relating to an agenda item at the meeting, provided that the motion falls within the powers of the electors at the annual meeting. Those powers are specifically limited by statute, and that is Wisconsin Statute Section 120.10. By way of example, the electors at the annual meeting do not have the power to hire or fire an employee, hire or fire a vendor, contractor, or consultant, approve or change the school curriculum, control the operation or management of the district, or approve, amend, or disapprove of the proposed budget. In regard to the proposed budget, the law authorizes the electors to provide input on the budget and then to vote a tax sufficient to operate and maintain the schools of the district. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. If an elector makes a motion that's beyond the powers of the annual meeting, the motion may be ruled out of order and the chairperson will decline to hear the motion. Like comments, motions must be made at the appropriate point on the agenda. After we complete item 8 on the agenda, which is the hearing on the budget, we will then move to item 9, adoption of the levy, and at that time, electors will be given the opportunity to make a motion to vote a tax that is sufficient to operate and maintain the schools of the district. If the electors do not vote a tax sufficient for that purpose, the school board will be obligated to determine the amount necessary on or before November 1. Similarly, if the electors vote a tax greater than the revenue limits or greater than the amount needed to operate the schools, the board will lower the tax on or before November 1. Other motions that are within the powers of the annual meeting and do not address the levy would fall under agenda item 10B, other annual meeting powers. Accordingly, any such motion should be made when we get to that point on the agenda. If you're an elector and you'd like to make a motion, there's a procedure for that as well. You're asked to come to the microphone, state your first and last name, state your address, and then wait to be recognized by the chair. After you've been recognized by the chair, then you may make your motion. A second is required for any motion to proceed. Once a motion has been made and seconded, the chair will restate the motion, and then discussion or debate may occur on the motion. After debate is concluded, the chair will put the motion to a vote, provided that it's within the powers of the annual meeting. If any elector, including a board member, believes that debate has become too lengthy, the elector may move to limit debate to a set amount of time, such as 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Alternatively, an elector may move the previous question. However, if you move the previous question, a 2/3 vote is required of all the electors to succeed. As an elector, you have a right to vote. All voting will be by voice vote. Generally, all in favor of a motion will be asked to say yes, and all opposed to a motion will be asked to say no. If the vote on a motion is close or unclear, the chair or I will ask the electors who said yes to stand and verbally count off, beginning with the number 1. After being counted, each elector will sit down, and the same procedure will then be used for those electors who voted no. The chair will then announce the result of the vote. The chairperson may accept a challenge to the eligibility of any person who's attempting to vote at this annual meeting, and if the person who has been challenged declares that he or she is eligible and the challenge is not withdrawn, the chair, by law, must administer the following oath or affirmation to the person. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you are an actual resident of the School District of Hudson and are qualified according to law to vote at this meeting? Having reviewed the annual meeting procedures, our next order of business is the election of a chairperson to preside over the annual meeting. In a moment, I'll ask for nominations. Once a nomination is made, I'll ask if anyone is willing to second that nomination, and if so, a vote will be taken on the nomination. If there is no second, the vote will fail for a lack of second. At this time, I am now asking for nominations using a microphone. Does any elector, including a board member, wish to nominate a person for chairperson?
I'd like to nominate Jamie Johnson.
Is there a second to the nomination?
Second.
Are there any other nominations? All in favor of nominating Jamie Johnson to preside as the chairperson at this annual meeting, say yes.
Yes.
All opposed, say no. The motion passes. And at this time, I will turn it back over to Mr. Johnson.
Okay, our first item then, once we get into this action item, we have to approve the last year's annual meeting minutes from September 9th, 2014. I'll entertain a motion from the floor.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of approving last year's annual meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Now we get to the next item on our agenda, which will be discussion of Hudson School District highlights. And Dr. Nick Olette, our superintendent.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I know this isn't always how everybody wants to spend their Tuesday evening, but we do appreciate any input that we can get. I want you to know that our district values, before I get into the highlights, I want you to know our district values all of our stakeholders. And I think that's why we do our best to make sure that everyone is getting the most bang for their buck as far as our school district goes. And I think our return on our investment is absolutely outstanding. I know Tim will talk about the financial piece here in a minute, but Sandy talked at the previous meeting about how great our kids are doing, and I will highlight some of those things coming up. One of the things that you will come to understand before I get into the presentation, and some of you have heard me talk about this if you were at the new teacher orientation meeting, is that our district tries to serve kids in a variety of ways, and not just the 180 days that the kids come to school, but we serve kids throughout the year, and the summer is no exception. This summer, the school district served over 2,500 kids in summer programming, including summer school, summer swim, band and orchestra camps, special education, and school-age care summer backpack program. Just because the school was out for the summer doesn't mean that we stopped helping kids. And with that program, there was a unique program that came up, and it was almost eerie how this whole thing came to be, because my wife came home, our kids were in the summer swim program, and she said, "You're never going to believe this. You know, I got ready to bring the boys to summer swim, and right before summer swim, there was a group of individuals getting out of the pool. And she said, Nick, and it happened to be all minority students. And she said, what is going on with that as far as that activity? It just seemed kind of odd. They have a very homogeneous group of kids all there before the swimming lessons, and they were doing swimming lessons as well. And I said, I don't know. I'll find out. And no earlier, I mean, it was within an hour she asked me that question before I even had an opportunity to ask someone. I got an email from one of our elementary principals, Amy Hamburg, and she said, hey, if you're really interested in seeing some neat programs that we have in the district, she said, should check out our program that we have in the summer that combines our ELL reading supports with swimming lessons. And I'm going, oh my gosh, this is the same item that my wife just got done asking me about not more than a couple hours earlier. And essentially what has happened, or what this program is, and it's unique, it's a very unique program, but it started 7 or 8 years ago, and what it is it's for our English language learners students, so students that are new to the district that come to us as English not their first language. And it starts with elementary students, and what they have is they have a swim lesson from 8 to 9 o'clock in the morning. And then from there, from 9 to noon at Hudson Prairie, they get reading instruction to help bring them up to speed and get them to where they can be successful. And I think what's interesting about this is that the structure, from what I've been told, has created better attendance at our reading program, has provided swimming skills, things along those lines. But the interesting thing is it has provided 2 life-saving skills. Obviously, one, the ability to read for kids, because that is a truly life-saving skill, and obviously the ability to swim. It's just another example of the unique programs that we have here at Hudson. It's not about necessarily an ACT score or an AP result or a Wisconsin report card, things that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes. But I think it's important to highlight those things, of some of the great things that we have going on in the district that we do for all kids, not just certain kids. And so I think that's a unique experience. The first slide up here talks about the Wisconsin School Report Card. All schools in the state of Wisconsin, along with the district, are rated on a report card, and you can find those report cards online. What you'll see is the Hudson School District report card. All of our schools and the district exceeded or significantly exceeded expectations on the Wisconsin State Report Card, which is a tremendous accomplishment. Now remember, as much as I'd like to take credit for any of these things, these were all things that happened last year, and even if I happened to be here last year, I know that my role is just one part of a facilitation, and that the getting us to these levels of exceeding or significantly exceeding is that of our staff and the kids in our buildings and our parents and our other stakeholders. And so something to keep in mind. So I am somewhat doing this from a perspective of what we accomplished last year, knowing that, as Jamie said, this was day 70 on the job, but it is nothing short of amazing as we work through this presentation. Let's see here. Now, earlier, Sandy stole my thunder a little bit with the AP results, but that's all right. One thing to understand is that our AP, or advanced placement courses, we've really expanded our advanced placement courses. We had over 632 students taking over 1,000 exams. That's over 30% of our high school kids taking AP classes. It's just a phenomenal number. Most schools would die to have half of that amount of kids taking exams, with a 77% passing rate. Just to give you an idea, somebody says, well, gosh, 77%, that means 23% of the kids didn't pass the AP class. You got to understand the national average is well below that. I think somewhere in the neighborhoods of 40 to 50%, and don't quote me completely on that, but we have a significantly higher pass rate than most other places. And so we really have some outstanding things happen with our AP programming at the high school. And I think, as she talked about earlier, we have more than doubled the amount of students in AP programming in the last 5 years, which is a great accomplishment. Now, this slide needs to be corrected. It should be 128 AP scholars, as Sandy alluded to earlier. But the 128 AP scholars, 3 national level AP scholars, 2 national merit scholars, 3 national merit semifinalists. So what you're seeing here is this is a culmination. Some people say all you want to do is talk about the high school or the end game on a lot of these slides. But you have to understand, we don't get here without everything that happens K-12. We don't get to national merit scholars without what happens in the elementary schools and what happens in the middle schools. And so, yes, although the high school tends to be our most visible indicator of achievement when it comes to some of these types of results and comparability, understand that it is the work that is done in the K-8 and the 9-12 that gets us these types of results. Maybe I'm going to get you to the next slide. Okay, fine arts recognition. One thing that we need to talk about a little bit is we have tremendous amount of involvement in our fine arts. We've had state honors musicians. We had 4 at the band orchestra level in the middle school, 5 middle school choir, 2 high school band orchestra state honors, and 3 high school choir state honors. 610 high school band orchestra and choir students, which is just a phenomenal number. It's about our kids getting involved. We know, and the research tells us, the more kids are involved, the more successful they are academically and down the road. 788 students involved in band, orchestra, and choir at the middle school, which is just, again, another phenomenal number, well over 70% of our kids. And then I think another unique program that not very many schools have that we do have here at Hudson is the elementary orchestra program, and that has blossomed into over almost 250 students in our elementary orchestra program, which is a great accomplishment. On the other end of the spectrum, but again, one of the other outstanding areas we have is our athletic recognition, and we had over 770 high school student athletes, and that's an unduplicated number. That means different high school students that were involved in athletics in the 9th through 12th grade. And we had a total of 1,121 high school athletes, and what that basically means is we had several students that were multi-sport athletes involved in different things. We had 20 state competitors, 4 Big River Conference champions, and I think what's interesting is 531 letter winners. But an interesting number, although people think of athletics and they think of just that, competing on the field, our kids have also shown that they can get it done on the classroom as well, with over 180 academic all-conference athletes through the Big River Conference. We did have 13 graduates this last year that have decided to continue their sport at the collegiate level, which is a tremendous accomplishment as well. Our kids and our community and our staff are what makes this place so great. And the staff recognition, to talk about a little bit, is we had 2 outstanding educators that were recognized last year, and it was Adam Coles and Carrie Heisler that were recipients of the Education Foundation of Hudson, the Star Excellence Award. And the Education Foundation is just an outstanding program that is there. It's an entity that supports both our kids but also our staff, and they understand that when we do great things for both of those individuals, in the end everybody wins. And so that is just a great foundation that we've had. In addition, with the awards for the Star Excellence Awards, the Hudson Education Foundation also awarded over $15,000 in grants for different projects for staff to do with kids over the last year, and just for classroom innovation, and really looking to see how can we continue to build upon some of the great things that we're doing. In addition to the Education Foundation, the teachers were awarded 3M Ingenuity grants for STEM education in the amount of over $60,000. And then additionally, we received a high school science department grant from Bosch worth around $5,000. And so just some really great things going on in the district, and some high-level things that are going on as well. The district goals, and they're really cut into 4 areas, and we talked about this at the last meeting, but I just want to touch on them real briefly as we move forward, moving into transitioning from 14-15 and moving into 15-16. And I think it's important that we understand that the implementation of HSD 2025 is really putting a vision to work, really looking at where do we want kids to be and what are our learner outcomes, and how do we want to make sure that every kid reaches their fullest potential. The connecting with community is a new area, and I think a big part of what we want to do with the Connecting for the Community piece is really just that. We want to make sure that we're building that sense of community with the branding campaign that really talks about how do we all focus on one end and one group and moving forward with that, and bringing all stakeholders together, with also looking at increasing transparency and also providing effective communication. I think we all, nobody could argue that there's not communication. It's just a matter of whether or not it's effective and hitting the targets we want it to hit and reaching the places we want it to reach. With the investment in human capital, and some of you alluded to this earlier, some of the board members alluded to this earlier, the investment in human capital is huge. And we are a school district, we employ people. That's primarily what our business is to educate kids and employ people. And so we know that if we want great outcome for kids, we have to invest in the people that work with them. And so there are several goals there that outline how we're going to invest in human capital. And then the last piece is really the K-12 plan for 21st century learning spaces. And the reason I say that it's a K-12 plan, and I know we spent a lot of time talking about secondary space, but we are a K-12 school district. And at all points as we move through these processes, as we try to decide what is our next steps, we know that whatever we do with the high school or middle school or an elementary, it all impacts one another. We're all interconnected. And so our goal isn't necessarily about always the amount of space, but what does that space look like? Is it productive? Is it usable? And how can we continue to support kids using those different spaces? So those were the four goals, or four goal areas to kind of bridge that gap with 15 and 16. The end of my presentation, I would say that I look forward to working with everyone here and working on building Hudson's reputation of a strong educational excellence. I want to tell everybody to have a great evening. I know you're going to have some interesting information coming from Tim in the next few minutes. And I want to say that with everything that's going on and everything great that's happening in our district, there is no better time to be a Raider. So thank you.
The district financial overview will be provided by Board of Education Treasurer Lynn Robson.
Thank you, Jamie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lynn Robson, and I'm the treasurer of the Hudson School Board. I want to thank many people for their work in preparing this budget, including my fellow school board members, Superintendent Dr. Nick Ouellette, Tim Erickson and his team, the district leadership team, principals, teachers, support staff, and to you, the residents of the Hudson School District, for the opportunity to speak with you briefly tonight and for your support of the Hudson School District. It takes the work of everyone on the team to produce a budget that both supports the instructional needs and goals of the district, as well as supports the needs and respects the needs of our taxpayer. As the parent of two girls in the Hudson School District, a community member, and a taxpayer, I, like all of you here, have a vested interest in the high quality of education that we are providing to the students of Hudson and the value to the community through sound fiscal management practices. As the treasurer, I can assure you that Hudson continues to operate in a strong financial condition. Regarding our financial health as a district, one measure of the financial health is the district's total educational costs per member. For Hudson, we are the 6th lowest out of 367 districts statewide and the lowest in our CISA 11 region, as determined by the Department of Public Instruction. Hudson's mill rate for 2014-15 is 8.84, and based on the proposed budget, that is projected to increase 0.26% to 8.86. The 8.84 mill rate is the 36th lowest out of 39 districts in CISA 11. And by way of comparison, during that same time period I'm referencing, the surrounding schools of Baldwin-Woodville, Somerset, St. Croix Central, and Richmond all have mill rates between 10 and 12. Obtaining and maintaining Moody's AA1 bond rating is a key indicator of the financial health of the district. This bond rating has helped the district with interest rate advantages in refinancing debt and keeping those costs as low as possible for our taxpayer. As a result of this bond rating, the district was able to refinance some of the general obligation bonds and save the district at a net present value $659,000. The AA1 bond rating reflects the district's growing tax base, strong cash reserves, and manageable debt levels. Additionally, the board has a policy of maintaining the general fund reserve balance between 25 to 30% of operating expenditures. It is because of this policy that the district has been able to cash flow operations throughout the year, despite the timing of state aid payments and property tax revenues, avoiding the need for costly cash flow borrowing. Regarding this year's budget and levy, and reflecting on the report of our superintendent, I believe we can be proud of the accomplishments of the Hudson School District, excited about our future, and proud that we are getting a high value for our tax dollar. The proposed budget that Tim will present in detail represents key investment dollars to implement the teacher salary structure, which we rolled out in 2015, which we believe will be a key to attracting and retaining key talent that we have in this district. Anticipating a 9.4% reduction in state aid, equating to $2.6 million, we have challenged the district to keep tight controls over expenses by reductions, reallocation, and restructuring where possible. The budget we will present to you will reflect a slight expenditure increase of 1.59%, but due to the state funding model, you will see a higher levy percentage increase of 6.73%. The proposed levy represents an estimated $13 million below the maximum levy allowed by state law. This Board of Education is committed to ensuring we have a conservative budget, yet providing the resources necessary to support the curriculum our students need to compete in the global economy. Our students are no longer competing for jobs and opportunities locally, but with children around the world. Not only do great schools help our graduates, but great schools directly impact the quality of our community, value of our homes, desirability of our neighborhoods, and our community spirit. As the treasurer of the Board of Education and chairperson of the Finance Committee, I stand behind the 2015-16 budget and annual plan. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Lynn. And now to present the proposed 2015-16 budget is the district's Financial Services Director, Tim Erickson.
Well, good evening, everybody. I sincerely want to thank you for coming out to learn more about the good news of the Hudson School District and to learn a little bit more about the budget and how your dollars are spent in the district. And as Dr. Ouellette alluded to, we do feel we provide a lot of bang for the buck here. I want to also thank folks. Our budget development process started about around December, and then it culminates in October. So next month, the end of next month, the board will adopt a final budget. So it is a long process. It's touched by a lot of people. I want to thank all of our staff, teachers, principals, other administrators. A lot of people touch this budget and contribute to the development of it. And so I certainly really appreciate all of their help and hard work on it. I also want to say a special thanks to Mark Cumlin. Mark was in the back there, and Lois Cesar for all of their work. They work in the Financial Services Department and put a lot of work into this budget presentation. As we start to look at, get into the budget, the larger numbers, so when we're looking at our largest revenue streams in the district are state aid and the property tax levy. When we look at property values and mill rate, all of those numbers, those large numbers, are based on estimates at this point. The Department of Public Instruction and Department of Revenue will come out with final numbers for each district in October. So we're 4 months into the fiscal year, and we get those numbers finalized 4 months into that fiscal year, which is a challenge in itself. Some of the other challenges that we have with this 15-16 budget is a loss or a decrease in state aid of approximately $2.6 million. There are pieces of the funding formula that say if you are a property or a higher value property district, the state looks at that and says, your taxpayer can afford to pay more. Whether that's right or wrong, that's the assumption of the formula. And so that aid leaves the higher property wealth districts and is transferred over to other districts. So that's one of our challenges. Really trying to find that fine line and balance between providing for our students and being good stewards for the taxpayer as well. So hopefully, if you have a book, and I'm going to jump to, okay. So I'll jump to page, it should be page 9 of your book. And this is just up here to give you an idea of where we are in the process. Some of these numbers are going to be pretty small, so if you don't have a book, there are books in the back, and Mark would be happy to get you one. So looking at how the information is set up for tonight, we'll do an overview of the 15-16 proposed budget and levy, of course. We'll look at the impact on property taxes, and then we've got some comparative information comparing Hudson to other Wisconsin school districts. And Treasurer Lynn Robson just gave you some comparative information. It's rather interesting in mill rate and that type of thing, or at least interesting to me. I don't know if it's interesting to everybody else, but and then finally the hearing on the budget. So questions, comments regarding the budget. And again, it's important to remember this is not the final budget. That'll be finalized by the board in October. Some of the things that we do to strive to maintain a balance between being a good employer, a good educator, and a good steward. We looked at several things to try and address this $2.6 million deficit that we had started out with. As you would imagine, in tough times, we're expected to try and reduce areas. And we use a number of different strategies. As Lynn mentioned, we reallocated, we reduced, and we reprioritized some of our expenditures. And we kept those reductions away from the classroom as much as possible, just to minimize the impact on students. We reduced some of the areas that we reduced. You'll see later on we reduced some of our equipment purchases. Those were cut back quite a bit. Capital projects were also cut back. We did a debt restructure that helped to bring down the levy about $600,000. We reduced professional development travel. Some of our contracted services were also reduced. So we really stayed away from the classroom and really minimize the impact to the student going forward. One of the other things that we've done, we just completed our second year of being a self-funded district for health insurance, health and dental insurance. And when we looked at developing our internal rate increase for this budget, it was a 3% increase for health insurance. That's a pretty low increase, considering that when you looked at medical inflation, it was running around 7%. So we've been able to control our health care costs, and of course, it's a large part of the budget, and it's something we've been able to do at this point fairly well, moving to that self-funded model. As Treasurer Robson noted, achieving and maintaining that high bond rating of AA1 from Moody's, that is something that when you look at the bond rating that's provided by Moody's, there are 5 other districts in the state and only 70 in the nation that have a higher rating. So they'd be in the AAA category. So this helps us reduce our borrowing costs. So if we go out for projects, go out for bonding or a referendum, et cetera, it just saves us dollars, saves the taxpayer dollars. So again, looking at some of the budget challenges, it's that large piece of state aid that's being reduced almost 10%. Another one is reaching a solution for the district's long-term facility needs, of which many of you are aware. There's been a very lengthy process that we're going through to get there, and a lot of community involvement. Continued implementation of competitive compensation structure to attract and retain top talent. It's a very, very important area for us to maintain and attract the best teachers and best support staff for our students. Addressing instructional needs. Professional development, as I mentioned, we reduced that this year. So again, some of these things, we do have some effects from the budget reductions. Curriculum adoption, we did build in some delays in curriculum adoption this year as well to meet that budget gap. And we reduced some of the resource materials, and we did slow down a technology innovation implementation. So a lot of different areas we reduced in a lot of different areas, and again, staying away from the classroom. And then the last one is maintaining that class sizes within the class size guidelines. Next, we get into a highly summarized version of the budget, the proposed budget and levy. And this has a few major assumptions in it. We did have a decrease of 94 student aid membership units, which affects our aid. And our equalization aid, as I mentioned before, that right now is based on an estimate by the Department of Public Instruction, and that will be finalized in October. This assumes an under levy, as Treasurer Robson had mentioned, of $13 million, and that's, as you'll see later, that's kind of unheard of. The amount relative to the district size is really kind of unheard of. It will very possibly become a challenge in the coming years to maintain an under levy of that size. This budget also approves also includes the approved health insurance increase that was approved by the board of that 3%, and then the implementation of the teacher salary structure. So if we're getting into the general fund and comparing what's proposed for this year, the 15-16 proposed budget and levy compared to last year. So property taxes, you can see that those took an increase. Now that's not the whole thing, but when we get to the bottom of the page, you'll see the total effect of that. We also have debt service levy, that's a separate levy. We've got investment earnings. When we look at, I'll say line 345, state aid for regular education and open enrollment, those are dollars, those are state aid dollars that flow into the district for students that open enroll into the district. If you go down under expenditures, we have a corresponding line item to that, number 382, the second line under expenditures, and that's payments to districts for open enrollment out. So students that go out of the district, aid follows that student. So that particular item is one of our challenges. As you can see there, we've got projected 175 coming into the district and 548 flowing out at this point. And those are very rough estimates. Unfortunately, we won't know some of those final numbers until very late into the year. We'll jump back up to the revenue section. If you go down to line 620, you can see that was one of the items that this year in the biennial state budget was whether to include or take out the $150 per student categorical aid. And that represents about a little over $800,000 to the district. Legislature did decide that was going to stay in, so that was very good news to Hudson and the rest of the district statewide in anticipation of helping to balance their budgets. The equalization aid, 621, of course, that's that second piece, the property taxes and then the equalization aid, two largest revenue streams for the district. And you can see that almost 10% decrease. And so part of that is due to what I mentioned before in the formula process, where if you have high property values, you get aid taken away. We also had a dip down in student membership units. So those two working together have a cumulative effect. And there's some other smaller pieces in that formula, but it amounts to about $2.6 million in reduction in state aid. If we go down, we can go down the list. I won't go through all of these. One of the other areas, line 700, federal sources. So the district receives federal aid. These are things like title programs. Again, it's a good news, bad news sort of thing. A lot of that funding is based on the demographics, so based on free and reduced lunch counts. And so if your demographics are favorable and you have low, free, and reduced lunch, you don't, that federal aid is adjusted downward. And so we had a little bit of a change in our demographics, so that was adjusted downward. That's certainly the good and the bad news of it. Total general fund revenues are going up slightly, so just a 0.62% increase. And so moving down into the expenditures, salaries and benefits. Those are all salaries and benefits for the general fund, and they're increasing about 4.17%. We're in the first year of the implementation of our teacher salary structure, and so that again is to invest in our employees and to retain and attract employees to the district. One of the areas that I mentioned before, we had the other purchase services, so that's line 300, and those are things like professional services, contracted projects that would be contracted out, almost a 12% decrease to address that budget deficit. Looking at the non-capital objects, and I look at line 400 and 500 together, one of the things that we did here is those are flip-flopping a little bit, but overall a reduction. So we've reclassed some items and under some new accounting rules internally. And so you'll see that's the reason for the 400 line item to go up 35%. We've basically moved and reclassified some items that would have been put in 500. They're now going to be put in 400. So that's why you see that increase there. Correspondingly, you can see if you net the two together, you've still got about a 35% decrease overall. Capital projects include things such as vehicles, different pieces of equipment that the district has, and so those expenditures were reduced down, again, to address that budget shortfall. Insurance and judgments, those are things like liability insurance, property insurance, workers' comp insurance, all the different types of commercial insurance that the district is required to have in place. And line 827 is the general fund covers a portion of special education, and that is about $6.1 million this year, so just about a 1.2% increase. And then we have an interfund transfer to debt service. That one's going down. Again, that is strategically something that we could do to relieve the tax levy a little bit, and then we'll pick that back up next year. So if you go down to the bottom, you can see total general fund expenditures only at 1.59%. So a relatively small number in relationship to the revenue that we're expected the revenue that's expected to go down. So if you look at surplus or deficit, for the 14-15 budget, we're expecting a deficit of about $400,000. In this proposed budget, if we read across, the deficit is about $942,000. The good news is if you look at that second line underneath there, the estimated change in the 14-15 fund balance, we're expected, we will end this past year, not 400,000 deficit, but 400,000 to the good. So that's a swing of 800,000. So you'd net that in, and we wound up in a better position, which was very helpful for this year. The projected unassigned general fund balance, and again, that's dictated in board policy, it's at 25 to 30% of expenditures. We were projecting in the 14-15 budget to be at 26%, so on the low side of the 25 to 30 range. And this year we're expected to be at 25.45. And if we get down to the breakdown in the total levy, so the total levy is $32,360,000 that's being proposed, and that's the debt service levy. So those are all of the things that have been voter approved. Debt service on voter approved debt, $3.5 million. It'll go from 4.1 down to 3.5. Again, that was a restructuring that not only it did a couple of different things. We obtained direct taxpayer savings. We were able to refinance to a lower rate, and at the same time, we were able to relieve some pressure off of the debt levy for the 1 year of about $600,000. Then you can see the total general fund levy and the total levy. So total levy is going up about 6.73%. Now that's higher than we've seen in the immediate preceding 5 years. On average, we've been about 1.7% increase. So again, looking at ways to try and mitigate that, and we put in place several reductions. If you look at page 13, 13 gives you an idea of how conservative the district has been in budget planning. And if you look at the top dashed line, that would be the district budget adjusted for inflation for each one of those years, 2010-11 through 2015-16. If you look at the bottom line, the dotted line, that is the district budget. And you can see that spread, especially in 11-12, 12-13, 13-14, there's been quite a difference. We've been much lower in our budget than what we had been had we applied the CPI, so the rate of inflation, to that. So again, our average, if you look at the average annual growth in the budgeted expenditures in that time period, it was about 1.77% annualized. And the 15-16 budget is $600,000 below an inflation-adjusted budget if we looked at the yearly increases. So again, we'll close the gap a little bit, but it really speaks to the conservative nature of our budget. And again, going back to the bang for the buck and how well our students do. Going to page 14, you can look at that same chart. This is related to that same chart, just a little bit different way to look at it. If you look at cumulative savings for the taxpayer for that same time period, it's about $13.2 million. So some very, very major savings during that period of time. And again, conservative nature. Next page goes through aid membership. This is what drives our student aid. This is what drives the state aid for us. We did have a drop down of students, and again, the high property values all contribute to that $2.6 million reduction. And the next page gives you an idea of what our revenues look like. So if you look at 14-15, the revenues under the general fund, you can see, of course, state sources and local sources are really, they're pretty close to even. Most years, history has shown us that the state sources many times will be 50%, local will be 48%, and some years they flip-flop. So we may have state sources at 48% and local at 50%. If you look down at the proposed budget underneath that, we do see a little bit more of a margin of increase there. So state sources are going down to 45%, and local going up to 53%. Again, federal sources account for very little of our district's budget. Many districts receive a larger portion of federal source revenue. Ours is under 1%. Then the next page, page 17, just gives you an idea and I'll say in theory, of how property taxes work in relation to valuations in the district. So this first example shows that even if values increase, and assuming no change in the levy from one year to the next, so everything then remains the same. So if you look in this example, one property is a 2014 assessed value of $100,000, and in 2015 the assessed value goes up to $110,000, and the same with the second property. So if you look at the share of how that levy is divided, then in 2014 and 2015 the levy remains at $3,000. There is no change, even though your valuations changed. There's no change in the levy. So now we'll add in a new twist to this. If look at that second section there, this one assumes new construction. And the numbers that we received preliminarily from the Department of Revenue suggest we've got about $60 million of improvements in the district this year. So we've seen some strong growth. We've seen price appreciation. Again, it's about almost 6.5% up, and that's much, much higher than the state average of about 2.5%. But in this example, the new construction, if we look at the first two homes, assuming kind of the same examples there, the assessed values haven't changed, but what we bring on is a new construction. So we bring on a new home assessed at $100,000. So the effect of that, assuming that the levy doesn't change, we just hold that a constant. So this is a simpler example, is that 2014, that levy was $3,000 or $1,500 per residence. So then with the new construction, it actually adds additional value. There's more taxes that are spread amongst those properties that have had new building on them and increased value. So in that example, the $3,000 is split between the three, and so it really reduces that tax from the $1,500 per 1,000 to $1,000 per residence. Now, it's a simple example. There are a tremendous number of variables that happen in each property tax bill, and we've just tried to put this in there so you can get a little bit of an idea of how things work together. On page 18, this is historical valuation in the district and what the levy and mill rate have been. The 15-16, again, is our preliminary estimates. And if we go all the way down to the bottom of that section, the 2015-2016 estimate, the district valuation is at $3.6 billion. That's an increase of almost 6.5% over the previous year. Again, the state average is running somewhere around 2.5. If you look up at 14-15, the valuation came in at 7.26, so it increased 7.26. Again, statewide valuations on average were about 2.4 to 2.5. So Hudson last year grew almost 3% more than the state average, so we've had very strong valuation growth. As we read across down on that bottom, going back down to that bottom line again, you can see the percentage change in the levy, 6.73%. However, as we talked about in that previous example, you can see that the net effect on the mill rate is the mill rate only goes up 2% or 2 cents. So from 8.84 to 8.86. The additional building construction actually dilutes that a little bit, and it helps everybody out. So we're going up just about 0.25% in the mill rate. So a pretty small increase, even though we have had a reduction of $2.6 million in our revenues. If you get down to the bottom, and here's where it gets more complicated, is what happens in each municipality. What happens here is when you have municipalities such as the town of St. Joe, it goes up 13%. That's some pretty strong growth. Town of Hudson up 8%. When we do what we call apportionment of the levy, and this is required by the state, it isn't something that Hudson makes up. We apportion that levy, and unfortunately, the districts that have strong, or the municipalities that have strong property value growth will shoulder additional levy. The ones that have lower property growth, such as the village of North Hudson, will shoulder less of that levy for that year. It's just for that year only, and that changes next year. It will be different, and these valuations over the years have jumped around quite a bit. We've seen some that are in a negative and others that are positive, all in the same year. The Department of Revenue looks at recent sales transactions, and they try to apply a market value to that, and that's what's called equalized value, and that's how we determine our levy and how we spread those taxes out over the entire district. Down at the bottom is an example of just how that mill rate is calculated. It's a pretty simple formula. and I won't go through it. Next page. A lot of numbers on that page. I don't plan on going through all of those. What this is it's a presentation by function, so functionality, budget-wise, of the general fund. So the numbers are the same. They'll match up as what you saw on the previous page, the one-page summary. It gives us fund balance information, which we've talked about. And then again, it just splits up the revenue and splits up the expenses by function. And then page 20, same thing. So in addition to the general fund, we have a special projects fund. Primarily, those are the operations for our special education students. We have a debt service fund, and again, those are mainly voter-approved bonds for previous construction projects. And then we've got food service. That is a self-supporting venture. It doesn't use any local tax dollars. We have community service, same with that, primarily user charges. And then we have a package and cooperative program, and that's cooperation with a couple of other area districts for a youth apprenticeship program. Page 21. In a very simple sense, we provide a balance sheet here. Balance sheet gets pretty complicated, a lot of accounts, but we try to summarize it here. This is a snapshot in time. These numbers change on a daily basis. And at June 30th, cash and investments stood at $17,219,000. And again, it talks about fund balance. Some of that drives down to the very bottom of fund balance. And the reason we need that is so we don't have to short-term borrow and incur interest costs to taxpayers. It also provides a basis, a key component for ratings. So for bond ratings from Moody's or Standard & Poor's, they always look at fund balance, and that's a measure of financial strength of the district. We also maintain that balance for any, if we have unanticipated expenditures. So let's say we have a roof problem and we've got to go in and spend, $200,000 or $300,000. If we have a boiler go down, those are high cost items. And if we don't have the funds available, we're kind of in a very difficult position to try and solve a problem that has to be solved immediately. This also helps with our cash flow. We go up to 2.5 months without revenues coming in, yet we have expenditures going out for all sorts of different things. And so we have to have a cushion in the bank to be able to allow us to meet our bills during those periods where we don't have much coming in. So again, I won't go through all the different line items there, but you can see that's that basic formula of assets minus liabilities equals fund balance. If you're an accountant, you'd enjoy that formula. So moving on to the next page, we talk a little bit about the long-term debt. So again, bond issues that paid for certain buildings, paid for certain improvements or additions to buildings. And those interest rates on those bonds range anywhere from about 1.5% up to about 4.5%. So these are things that we look at on a regular basis and look at for refinancing opportunities. Unfortunately, they're not as simple as a home mortgage. We just can't go out and refinance whenever we want. There are bond covenants and restrictions on when we can go out and go to the market and see if we can get better interest rates. But we have done that many times when we've seen the interest rates drop and we have a issue that we're able to refinance. So total print down at the very bottom, a total principal July 1st, about just a little over 19 million. And we'll make payments on that to bring that principal balance down to about 16.3 million. You can see the related interest there. And then you can see correspondingly on the right two columns, we have the debt service levy, and that's at 3.5 million. The next page, page 23. This is what you'll vote on tonight. So this is the resolution, and so the resolution breaks that total levy amount of $32,360,000, and $28,008,000 is for the general fund, and $3.5 million for debt service, and that is the proposed levy. And now we'll talk a little bit about some of the comparisons. I'm not going to go through every one of these. You certainly can take it home for light evening reading if you want. It's a great insomnia aid. And I'm going to jump to page 28. So what this table here does is really looks at spending per member or per student. So 1314 is the latest statewide information that's available. And if you look at K-12 school districts, Hudson is ranked 362, and it's the sixth lowest of 367 K-12 districts in the state. Again, we are providing a lot of bang for the buck, and you know, sometimes we need to look at those numbers. We may not always be able to be at the bottom, and I think that's an important thing to remember. We do have needs. You know, sometimes we have budget reductions, and we have to put off doing certain things, and we come back. But again, we're trying to provide for our students and trying to walk that line and be good stewards for the taxpayer as well. If you go to the next page, 29. This page takes those same total education costs per member, per student, and it compares us with our Cooperative Educational Service Agency number 11. That is the region with those districts 1 through 39, so 39 districts in there. And you can see the total educational cost ranked in order from high to low, and you can see Hudson at the very bottom. And you can see the membership of those varying districts. Of course, Hudson is the largest district in the region. Again, dead last in spending. So if you go to the next page, gives you an idea of the mill rates. And mill rates, mill rates determine taxing and how much tax you pay on your home. So Hudson in 1415, that mill rate was finalized at $8.84 per 1,000, and that was 36th lowest out of 39 districts. And you can see, you go all the way to the left-hand side of the page, the Elmwood School District is somewhere over $15 per 1,000, and you can see how all the neighbors compare as well. Page 31 is district underlevies. Again, looking at statewide information and what does that underlevy mean? That means it's the amount of, those are dollars in this current budget, $13.2 million that could be levied, but that is not going to be levied. And that's last year in 14-15, it was $12.8 million. So we broke this down and looked at districts around the state and districts that had an underlevy greater than 5% of the levy limit, or districts that had a levy greater than $500,000. So we looked at it a couple of different ways. Many districts have a underlevy that shows up even if it's $1 or if it's $10,000, and those in some ways aren't very significant. So we tried to look at this a little bit differently. And you can see where Hudson is. So the underlevy amount last year was the most in the state. Compare that to number 2, Madison Metropolitan. Madison's a district about 4 times the size of Hudson. They have about 20,000 students. There is an $8.7 million difference between those two underlevies. And then you can see how they drop down. You get down to number 3, Cadott. So it goes from Madison from 4 million, Cadott to 2.7, and so on. So 24 districts in the state had underlevies a greater than 5% of the levy limit, or greater than the 500,000, the under levy greater than $500,000. So, it gives you a little bit of an idea. And that is it. The last few pages are pages of definitions, and I'm sure everybody will want to read through all of those. So, but I thank you very much for your time, and we'll go forward with the hearing from there.
Thank you, Tim. So now we've reached that part of the agenda where we have a hearing on the budget. Anyone present in the room, anyone considered an elector in the district has the right to comment on the budget, which is pretty much everything that Tim Erickson and Lynn Robson outlined. So electors, of course, include the people sitting up here at the table, but it's not exclusive to us. The board had its opportunity to specifically comment on this budget at the last meeting, which was about 2 hours ago. And but they can obviously repeat those comments if they wish. We've got a little greater audience here at this point. So I just open it up to anyone who wishes to comment on this budget. Can now. It's the first call. I'm not seeing anybody. We got anybody that wants to make a comment. We've got somebody. All right. If you want to come forward, Steve, and just come up to the microphone, please. We need you to state your first and last name, and then which municipality you're a resident of.
Steve Nielsen. I'm a resident of the Township of Hudson. If I was a school board member, there's one basic bit of information I'd want to know about this budget before I approved it, and yet I suspect that none of you on the board are aware of this or know the answer. Possibly Tim Erickson might be able to answer it. The question is, how many new full-time equivalent positions are being added with this budget? And of that number, how many are classroom and how many are not?
I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Of the total new full-time equivalents, how many of those are in the classroom and how many are not?
Okay. So as I understand the question, it's how many FTEs do we have in the district, and of those, how many are classroom related and how many are not associated with a classroom?
Not quite. I'm asking how many new full-time positions are being added
Oh, new full-time are being added.
in this
Okay.
budget, yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry for, I just want to make sure we get the question right. So is there somebody here who feels qualified? Tim, you want to?
That is a great question. I don't have the exact number, but it was fractional, if I remember correctly. One of the things that you see in the newspaper that for the welcome back that the chamber puts on is you see all these teachers in the paper. And we see 30 positions, but a lot of those are due to retirements and due to resignations, et cetera. So there's some turnover in the district, and those are replacement positions. But again, in looking at the budget shortfall or the reduction in state aid, we really, and I wish I had the number for you. I don't off the top of my head right now. I don't know if anybody
That's
else
something
out there
that
might.
maybe our personnel director
say
would be
that,
able to
yeah.
research, and we'll get that to you, Mr. Nielsen. But my recollection, the board's been addressing this budget since, I guess, before maybe March. I thought it was March,
yeah.
but when it was first brought forward, that's one of the things that is brought to the board is what are we going to do with this budget and how it relates to personnel, because we have to do new hiring or hiring for those positions that are not going to be filled again because of retirement or whatever. And my recollection, there's recommendations that come forward from our personnel director and through the superintendent. And I'm trying to remember last fall when we looked at that, it was, we took away certain areas and then we added certain areas, and it ended up being like a fractional part of, it was around one or so.
It was very, very small. And I don't know if we've got that number offhand or not, but so.
All right. I think that we're making
Yeah.
Google work right now at this point, so we'll see if we can
Yeah.
get the access the data banks to be able to answer that question. But very good question. Thank you for that.
Mr. President, I would like to just ask Tim a couple of things, just for clarification, in case anyone else in the audience is thinking the same thing I'm thinking. And I apologize, I should have saw this, or should have seen this at the last meeting, but I didn't look closely enough at the figures. On the expenditures on page 12, I see that the capital objects has gone down, about $1 million. Is that the category where we would see the things that Jim brings about repairs to the buildings and maintenance and upkeep? Is that in that column?
There'd be it would be a combination of the 300 and the 500 series accounts. So those are, that we hit that pretty hard this year to try and balance budgets. That also represents equipment expenditures, so we've delayed purchasing a couple of vehicles, and so there's a number of different things in there that we've reduced. We also, one of the other things in there that allowed that to go down more is we completed that multi-year safety and security projects in the district.
Right.
And we still have things to do there, but they're not on the same dollar volume. So that allowed us to reduce that down.
We're
as
not
well.
going to see, I hope, a deterioration in any buildings or any work that should be done this year because of this, are we?
Well, no, I don't believe we will. We can't. This isn't something we could continue for years, but it's something that we could address this year through reductions. So, for example, some of that represents some roofing. So if we looked at, and talking with Jim, looking at the condition of our roofs in the district, is something normally we might spend six figures on, but that was reduced down. So those are things, and again, when we look at it, we say, can we do it? We certainly don't want water infiltration in any of our buildings, but so it's taking some of those things. If we're able to reduce them for a year, we can do that.
Okay, I just thought I'd ask because
Sure.
I know that that figure of, what was it, 12 million or whatever it was that we're under levy? Was that the figure?
Oh, the 13.2 million, the under levy?
The under levy?
Yes, 13.2. Yeah.
It would seem to me that being that much under levy is not worth it if we're going to be seeing deterioration in our buildings because our budget for that category is so small. I would rather see us be 12 million under levy than 13 million under levy and be able to keep up with our buildings.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and again, I would agree. I don't know that we can keep that size under levy going on into the future if we
Well, I don't want to
it.
see that size
Yeah.
under levy if the buildings aren't being, if they're not being attended to like they should be. And this is such a major decrease in what we spent last year that I've got some concerns about it. I'm just letting you know, okay? One other question I have, I noticed on page 21 and 12. On 21, you say that in that last line, on 21, it says the 2014-15 unassigned fund balance is projected to be 27.67%, okay?
Great.
On page 12, the 2014 fund balance as percentage of expenditures, that should be the same percentage, shouldn't it? But it's not.
Well-
So can you just explain why it's not?
Sure, yeah, because when we're comparing, on page 12, we're comparing budgets. So, and page 21 starts to take our actual numbers, so that's why there's that difference there. And so that's really why you get that. Now, that'll line up, will be in the 14-15 unassigned balance is projected to be 27.67 on page 21. And so
But why would that be?
we're above, so because we beat the budget, we're better than what we had budgeted. So we had budgeted a $400,000 deficit, which would have brought us down to the 26.11.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah,
All right,
so, okay.
that explains it.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? We can take any comments from anyone in the audience or members of the board that have further questions about the budget or the change in the levy. I want to give everyone a fair opportunity here. There's a lot of material that Tim ran through, And I just wanted to clarify one thing, Tim. You just said 13.2 million on the under levy. Is it actually 12.8, or is that 13.2 was last year? I know that it depends on which period of time you're looking at.
Yeah, the 12, on the one presentation, that was taking the actual levy from the current, or from last year, so it was actually 12.8 million. So this year, we're projecting at 13.2.
Okay. And again, these budgets, you try to, they're estimates of expenditures and revenues, and sometimes we do better and sometimes not, and that's why last year projected a $400,000 deficit. We ended up with an $400,000 excess.
Yes, that's right, yeah. And that's, when you look at that, the variance is roughly, I think I had a number written
It's
down.
less than 1%.
It's less, yeah, it's less than 1%, which is really a small variance. We don't always hit it that close, but this year we were able to. 1.3.
And again, this proposed budget based on units from actually September of 2014's student count. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Our official count for this year is not for another 10 days or so, but that will be then for the next budget of 2016-17.
Right, that's the membership portion which drives the aid. And then there's another portion of that count that drives the actual revenue limit, which is the total aid and levy mix that you can have for a school district, and that's actually driven by current figures. It's a little confusing, but that's what we have. So.
And just, if you could explain the difference between when we have all these comparisons to other districts, and we got two numbers. One is the TEC, total educational cost per member, and then the other is the revenue number. So our total educational cost per student is, for the last fiscal year, or the fiscal year of these statistics, is 2013-14. That was 10,297, but our revenue number was 11,468. Is the difference is what's represented with the debt service?
No, actually, yes. The total educational cost is a formula that DPI has, and it includes all your general fund costs to educate students, your special education dollars. It includes debt service. It includes a number of different things. So that's all wrapped into that number and then divided by your student membership count. And so those numbers never equal, the expense and the revenue never equal each other, but they're always a little different. What drives that revenue down, if you look at page 26, so the revenue per member, per student, what drives that down mainly is the $13 million under levy. That's what pushes that down so much for Hudson.
Okay. All right. This is quite a wide variation in the state, from nearly 24,000 per student down to 10.4 on the revenue, or 10.5, and we're obviously 331 out of 367 on the revenue side. So, all right, very good. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. President.
Yes, Rob.
So if I'm a taxpayer, and I am in our school district, and we've talked about our unassigned general fund balance, looking at this as a taxpayer, we have $14,364,000 in unassigned general fund balance. And we've talked about our bond rating. Why wouldn't we spend some of that money down to alleviate some of the jump in potential mill rate? Can you explain that a little bit, Tim?
Yeah, you bet. So we're projecting that 14.3, and that's at 25%, at about 25%. Your fund balance policy is at 25 to 30% in your unassigned general fund. So that would be one reason we wouldn't spend that down. Now, we have talked a little bit before, questions about the secondary space, the unassigned, and I'm going to turn to a page here so people can follow along. If I turn to page 21, and I'm going to go into the heading fund balance, and if you look at the secondary space for learning, there's $5 million there. Now, that $5 million is going to be adjusted down because of the improvements to the science labs at the high school. The board elected to take that out of that committed fund balance. Now, that's an area that you could take, and it wouldn't drop you down below 25%. And in, again, discussions that we've had previously a little bit on the topic, I had discussions with Moody's and said, what if, if the board wanted to look at that, what would be the impact on our rating? And it's one analyst's opinion, but she did say she thought a planned spend down over time wouldn't have a negative impact, given everything else being the same. So that would be, as we've talked about before, would be an area that you could look at going forward.
Did you say would or would not have a negative impact?
She didn't feel it would have
She
an
thought it
impact.
would not have a
It
negative.
would not have an
Okay,
impact.
thank
yeah,
you.
Yeah.
When you say over time, would that also include okay, so we're roughly going to have 4 million left after these science labs, roughly, in the secondary space for learning. And if the proposal was to apply that to any referendum that would go on the ballot before the end of this year and applied, would that, similarly, would it have an impact, or would that, because by applying it in that fashion, you're affecting how much bonds you're buying out over the next 22 years, so it's kind of a longer period of time.
Yeah, no, that would, again, anything, it's, the board set that aside for secondary space, and you'd be using it for what you plan to use it for, so it wouldn't, and so the flexibility, though, is you would have flexibility to uncommit, take action to uncommit that, and similarly, as Rob's suggesting, you could put some of that against the tax levy to reduce it. Again, you have less going forward for any potential referendum.
Any further questions then? I think it's probably my third call for comments or questions.
I just
Yes,
have one
Sue?
more.
Sure.
So with like the lab improvements that we've done in the high school and anything that any additions that we put on buildings or, does that make the assessment of that building then have greater value? I mean, like if I put an addition on my house, then my house is worth more. I mean, what is there's a benefit, right? Coming out of, you spend money to improve a building or lab.
Yeah, and for us, so the district is tax exempt, so there are no taxes paid on the buildings. Of course, the big benefit was for students doing those labs. Previous to this, not every student got to participate in lab experiments. Now we've got fully fitted labs where kids are going to be able to participate. That was the big impetus for that project.
So it's a functionality issue, and but just to clarify, we didn't, in committing the dollars that we did, we're not pretending that we're bringing all our science labs up to the full amount that we need for the population that we have.
Unfortunately, no. It's addressing a small number of labs, but nonetheless, a very, very well worthwhile project for students.
Well, and as we alluded to, I think at the previous meeting, it's going to enable us to be able to possibly put another AP class, take it off the online version, and be able to teach it in our schools. Is that right? Is that what I heard?
I believe so,
All right.
yeah.
Okay, then I will make the fourth and final call. Any other comments or questions that might come up, maybe based on some of the questions that were asked by folks up here or Mr. Nielsen's question? Anyone have any other questions or comments regarding our budget? If not, I would entertain a motion for adoption of the levy. And we need to use the language that's in the annual meeting book at page,
23.
thank you, Tim, 23 you said? Yes,
Yeah.
23. Anyone in the room can make that motion, doesn't have to be somebody up here at the table, so.
Mr. President,
Yes, Carrie.
make a motion, be it resolved that a tax in the total amount of $32,360,197, of which $28,840,159 in the general fund, $3,520,038 in the debt service fund, be and is hereby levied against the taxable property in the Hudson School District for school purposes.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion by Carrie Whitaker, second by Lynn Robson. Then I ask all electors in the room, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion passes. And we now move on to new business. First item of new business is to set the date for the 2016 annual meeting. Proposal is to keep it where we've had it for several years, and that is the second Tuesday in September. I hope that complies with the statute. I didn't check to see, but our council is nodding and saying it does. So I guess at this time we would entertain a motion for setting of the 2016 annual meeting.
So moved.
Second.
And I presume that when I stated the date, you would like to start at 7 p.m. as opposed to any other time?
Yes, sir.
All right. Motion by Sandy Gerke, second by Bruce Hanson. Then I'll ask those in attendance and the electors, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Then under new business, we have other annual meeting powers. I'm not going to go through the list. There's a list of, what did we say? There's about 16 or 17 that could be brought up. This is an opportunity for electors to do so. Constituents. You also always have the option of contacting the board or the district to get things addressed by the board, but this is your time to bring it up here at the annual meeting. So I'll just first call for other annual meeting powers. Make a second call for anyone who wishes to present other annual meeting powers. I'm not seeing anyone move, and I'm not hearing anyone say yep. So I'll make the final call. Any other persons wishing to raise an issue that can be brought up pursuant to statute for annual meeting powers? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Lynn Robson, second by Bruce Hanson. All in favor of adjourning this annual meeting of the Hudson School District, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.